Growing up, I've always been fascinated with building things. It started with Legos, it changed to K'NEX, and then as I got older, the idea of building things changed. So in this video, I'm going to talk to you about how my needing a shop started and then where I'm currently at now. I'm also making this video because I'm currently in the process of moving, and my current shop really means a lot to me, and I wanted to kind of memorialize it before I move so I can always look back at this video and remember kind of all the projects I worked on and how this shop really impacted my life during this time. So what you're looking at here is a picture of my first workshop. As you might be able to tell, my first workshop was a TV tray holder and a Radio Shack soldering iron. And on here you can see my first real electronics project was a solar powered cell phone charger, and it worked just about as well as this looks. After that first picture was taken, I really got bit by the electronics bug when I discovered Arduinos and 3D printing. I moved from multiple different houses and apartments, and at each place I'd have at least a workbench and a soldering iron. So this is a picture of what I would consider probably my third shop at this point. It's just a workbench I have in my old house in the city. The house was like 100 years old. It was an old limestone foundation. It leaked like a sieve, but it was great for me. A few years after the last picture was taken, I moved again, and when I moved, I insisted that my new shop had to be inside of a garage. I was tired of hauling plywood up and down flights of stairs. So my new workshop at my new house was actually in my two-car garage. And it's not the entire two-car garage, it was just kind of a quarter of it. So after a few years of working in a cold, dark garage, I decided I needed a dedicated workshop that had more natural light, that was insulated, that I could heat. So I hired someone to build a third car garage onto my house. So in this video, I'm going to give you a tour of my workshop now and show you how it's gone from this picture to what it currently is. So this is what I call the annex. So I had two options in life. I could either park my truck in here or I could use it as part of the overflow from the shop. And I obviously chose overflow from the shop. Now I'm currently in the process of kind of packing up my shop, so it's a little bit in shambles in here, but I'll give a quick overview of what's in here. So this is the CNC machine. I've done lots of videos about it. My CNC machine stays out here. I used to have wooden racks over there to hold all my my wood. So I used to have like 2x4s and stuff over there. There's another rack there that I used to use for 2x4s. And then and scraps. And then I have my air compressor up there. And that air compressor is actually piped all the way into the shop. So, start walking to the shop. And again, overflow, I have my table saw out here and my bandsaw because it just doesn't fit. Okay, so this is what it looks like whenever you open up the shop. We're walking from the annex into the shop, and as we come into the shop, you're going to notice two things right off the bat. One, I'm patriotic, and two, I have some sort of fascination with orange, and we'll get to that. But first, let's talk about the shop in general. So this shop is insulated, and one thing about this shop that I really wanted that I had never had in my previous shop is natural light. All of my shops up into this point were either in dark, dingy basements or in dark garages, so I wanted natural light. So I have two windows, one there, and I also have two skylights, one there and one right there. And those skylights are fantastic. During the summer, it gets a little warm, so I actually put in cheap shades, and I can just pull those down during the summer to keep the shop from getting so hot. So let's go into more depth about everything. So first thing, we'll start here. I have a sub panel in my shop. It has obviously 120, 240. So I have a couple 240 volt receptacles and a lot of 120 volt. So there was no shortage of power here. One thing I did that the electrician wasn't the most happy about is I insisted everything be run in exposed EMT conduit. I know that's a little bit overkill for some people, and I totally understand that, but everything in this shop is run an exposed EMT. I did that for 2 reasons. One, so I could see where everything was and I wouldn't accidentally hit Romex in a stud. And 2, that's actually the only reason. That's the only reason I can think of. I just did it that way. I wanted to be able to see where the conduit was, be able to kind of relocate it if need be. So that's what I did there. Upstream of the sub panel is a disconnect, and I put the disconnect there for 2 main reasons. One, I use a lot of 3D printer, laser cutters, soldering irons, things that can catch on fire if you're not careful or if you forget to shut them off. So I can turn that disconnect off and it kills the entire shop. So if I turn that disconnect off, I know everything in the shop's dead and I can, leave and go on vacation, or if I'm out of the shop all week, I can just do that and know everything's off. The second reason I did that is I can turn that disconnect off and then work in the electrical panel without having to go to the basement to turn off the main breaker. So that's why I put that there. Underneath that, I have got my jet joiner planer. This is good enough for what I need. I don't do a lot of nice furniture working, and I don't work with hardwood very often. This does struggle with hardwood, be aware, but for everything I do, it's fine. Underneath that, I've got my socket sets. Nothing earth-shattering. Here on the side, I have a device I made. I've actually made a couple of these. These are kind of, you can think of them like handoff auto switches that control a relay that then control this receptacle. I, like I said, use a lot of 3D printers, and I don't really trust 3D printers. They're mostly made in China, and they're significantly better now than they used to be, but I don't really trust them printing overnight while I'm not watching them. So what I did is I made this device. This device can detect if there's smoke in the 3D printing chamber or if it's too hot, and if either of those things happen, it kills power to this receptacle, which then kills the 3D printer and whatever else is plugged into it. On top of that, I made these wireless. So these actually talk to a head-end unit that has a touch screen. I'll show you all that here in a second. Speaking of that, let's turn this on so you can see. There it goes, turns on. So whenever it turns on, this light comes on. So over here, we have got my 3D printers. My first one is the Ender 3. This thing is bulletproof. I really do like the Ender 3. It is not a super fancy printer, but it does what I need it to do. And it's been pretty bulletproof for me. And then below that, I have got my Solidoodle 2. And for any of you who don't know what that is a 3D printer that came out in like 2012. Those were back in the archaic days of 3D printing. And back then, your slicer programs didn't do built-in supports or any sort of that, good stuff. You actually had to have a computer tethered to this all the time for it to work. You couldn't just pop an SD card in it. Obviously, that didn't work for current day 3D printing. I actually upgraded this with a Ramps board a few years ago and gave it a little LCD screen. It now runs off SD cards. It works okay. It's not as good as my Ender 3, but it's really good for making like brackets that I need multiples of. It's good for that. So as you can see up here, this is a smoke detector, which you can't see. Let's see if I can get it angled right. Yeah, there you go. See it inside that silver thing? It's actually a temperature sensor. So this device is then routed back to that relay controller I told you about. So if I click this button, it'll simulate, words are hard, it'll simulate a smoke detector going off, because obviously it's just testing a smoke detector, and should kill everything in here. So let's see if that works, and if that does, the lights will go off in this enclosure. Look at that. Hopefully that didn't blow out your ears. So that's just kind of a fun thing I made. Let's shut this. And then if you didn't notice, I made this whole enclosure. I was so proud of it. And then it fit the Ender 3 perfectly. And you could close the door and everything worked great. I didn't take into account that this is what they call a bed slinger. So whenever the bed's out, it would have hit the door. So I had to make this contraption to get it to work, but it turned out all right. If you're wondering, all of my enclosures that are clear, this is actually just a sheet vinyl film. I think they use this whenever they make like windows for tints. It's super cheap. You can buy it by the huge sheets, and then I just cut it to whatever enclosure I want, and then I staple it on. And on this one, you can see I finished it off with some really fancy electrical tape. So those are my two 3D printers. Here I've got my Ender 5 Plus. So put this up so you can see it. I bought this 3D printer whenever it was actually brand new, I think. It was a new product from Creality. I really liked the Ender 3, so I bought the 5 Plus. So excited. This thing was junk. Stock from Creality, it was absolutely awful. So what I've done since then to make it not awful is I upgraded the motherboard. I got a new touchscreen and I relocated it up here. And then I also did a direct drive extruder, and that has made this actually usable now. So I like this 3D printer. The actual frame and structure of it was great, but everything else about this printer was just awful. So we'll close this. There we go. Above that, I have got kind of my miscellaneous stuff. So that's like my isopropyl alcohol whenever I do electronics. I've got hydrogen peroxide whenever I'm working on old video game consoles that need to be de-yellowified. The always useful hairspray whenever you're 3D printing. And then some kicker for whenever I'm using super glue, which is way too often. And some disinfectant wipes for whenever I don't know. Above that, that's where I used to have all of my electronics hand tools. So like, you know, your circular saw, your Sawzall, all of that's up there. It's kind of been packed away, as you can see, but that's where it all used to stay. To the side of it, I've got these little trays that you get from Harbor Freight that are magnetic, and that usually holds just junk. Then there's a heat gun down there. Next to this, I've got my Ion speaker. So my parents actually bought this for me 10 years ago-ish, and it just happened to be orange. This was before I did anything in this shop. So, you know, just lucky that that's orange. This is, you know, when I showed you that relay for the 3D printer before, this is actually what it communicates with. So this is the touch screen that kind of controls all of those relays. So for example, here's one right here. So the Ender 5 Plus has a relay as well, and you can tell it's off because that light's off. And you can actually come over here. Hopefully I'm not making you too sick. And then you hit the one that says laser. See that? It turned on. Now, why did it say laser? Because I mislabeled it in the program and I'm too lazy to fix it. But you can see it works, and that's what's important. What this device does, other than overcomplicated way of just turning something on, is there's a smoke detector also connected to this. So if this device determines that there's a fire in the shop, it can automatically kill all of those devices. So for example, we can simulate that. If I say, all right, I want everything to turn off, flip that off, and then you see how that light went off, everything's now dead. So just a fun project. I was trying to learn about wireless RF communication, so that's what I did there. Here I have got a PCB etcher shaker thing. I don't know what the technical term for it is. I went through a phase there where I decided I was going to learn how to make PCBs. And if you don't know how you make a PCB with etching, you basically put a design on a piece of copper clad board, and then you put it in this ferrochloric acid, and it eats away copper where you don't want it. But you have to constantly take that Tupperware with the PCB in it and tilt it back and forth to get the acid to evenly etch everything, and that sucks. To be honest, that was really boring. So I made this device. You could, it would etch for you, and it would kind of time everything. That was actually a really fun project. I'm going to turn that off since we're talking. But I made that, and then shortly after I made that, I stopped etching PCBs. So I don't know. Still a good project. Here I've got a drill holder. This is not fancy. I started making this and I thought, oh, this is going to be so great. And then I wanted to start on another project, so I made it as quickly as possible. And it's not my pride and joy, but it works. It holds drills and other junk. Here I've got some 3D printed drill bit holders. So that's everything there. Above that, I've got the always useful zip ties. This is a corner of junk. So it's usually some scrap wood, I don't know what's down there. I'm not even gonna look. Here I've got a tote that I use as a trash can because, why not? Then next to that, I have got my workbench. Now this workbench has been with me from basically every single shop I've ever had. It's gone through lots of different changes, but I really do like this bench. It's pretty fun, and it's been upgraded. So on the side of it, I've got, screws, fasteners, wood fillers down here. I've got tape measures over there. And then at the bottom, I've got the always useful wood glue. And then if I ever do any acrylic stuff, the acrylic stuff's down there. Below that, it's mostly junk. Let's be really honest. It's just mostly junk, but junk I don't want to part with, so I leave it there. Continuing on, I have got my disc/belt sander right there. It's a Win model, works fine for what I need. I've also got a 240 volt receptacle back there because I thought at one time I was going to get into welding. That didn't happen. This is one of those magnetic bars you can get. I think I got that from Harbor Freight, I'm sure. And it just holds just miscellaneous tools. Below that, I've got all of my, a lot of my drill bits. I obviously lost a lot of drill bits here. Don't judge. Then I've got these. They're not hole saws. I don't know what they are. Just Google them. I use them. Then I've got my paddle bits. Then I've got some T Allen wrenches. This is really nice. So this is my grandfather's drill press that I got when he passed. So I really like this drill press. I use it all the time. Next, let's go down. Let's actually go down. So below that, I have got a lot of shoe boxes. So these shoe boxes are really nice for storing like things together and being able to see what they are. So that's obviously hot glue, Dremel stuff, and wood burning things. This didn't need a label. You should know. That's for sanding. So I've got a lot of those shoe boxes. As you can see, it's not super helpful that I built that there, but then the workbench usually sits there. So I don't know. It is what it is. Adjacent to that, I have where I keep all of my screwdrivers. So all of those stay in there. It's really nice because you can kind of see, what screwdriver you're about to pick up. I think everybody watched that Adam Savage video where he did something like that. And of course I did. And I made something very similar. Above that, I have basically anything that's got two handles that you need to squeeze. I try to throw it up here. Scissors, snips, electrical pliers, tin snips, all that junk's here. Above that is the flag. And then this, guys, this is junk, except for the Craig jig. That's not junk. But the rest of this, that's all junk. I don't even know where that duck came from. I think that was the owner of this house before I bought it, and it showed up. It's not a real duck. That's a wooden duck, just for clarification. Then we've got a cheap miter saw that I bought years and years ago that works as well as I need it to. It's a Ryobi miter saw. Adjacent to that, I have got my wrenches, beautifully shown here. I don't use them very often, but whenever you need them, it's really nice whenever they're organized. So I've got wrenches, and then socket head screwdriver things. I don't know what the technical term is for them, but that's what those are. Then below this was a giant pain. I watched that Sortimo video, I think, or something like that Adam Savage did. And then I watched all those videos that people did talking about the Harbor Freight containers and how you could use the bins in them and store all of your things and organize them. And it was a fantastic idea. And I did that. And I hated it. I'm going to be really honest with you. I hated it. It was really great for organizing everything. I loved the little bins that everything went into. But I absolutely hated the idea because I would need, let's say, a piece of electronic equipment from that bin. And then from that, I would need like, I don't know, an electrical connector. And then from that one, I need a screw. And then from that one, I need a different fastener. Next thing I know, I had about 10 of these on the workbench, all open, just junk everywhere. It was awful. I couldn't get to any of my parts. I hated it. But I really liked the little parts bins inside those. So what I did was, if you look, these cases, they have these little indents on them. So what happens is those little parts bins, they sit on these indents because they have little protrusions from the bottom, and that's what keeps the little bins from shaking around. So I measured the indents on that case, and then I used my laser cutter, which I'll talk about here in a second, to cut pieces of really thin Luan to have the same indents that those cases had. And then now, the little bins that were in the Harbor Freight boxes fit perfectly in here, and they don't shake around. Look at that. So that is what I use my Harbor Freight cabinet for. So this U.S. General cabinet, I couldn't say enough good things about it. I love it. And putting all the little bins in there from the old Harbor Freight storage bin thing, this works fantastic. You know, you got all your electronics, all my electrical connectors, nuts, bolts. I love this thing. This thing's great. This system is fantastic. Also, there's some crazy people on Thingiverse who made all of these little printable bins that work the same as the Harbor Freight ones, and you can just pop these in here, and they're works great. I really like this solution. So that's what this is full of, just little parts. I've got tons of just junk. Just lots of junk, and it keeps me organized, so I like it. Now, what do those cases do now? Absolutely nothing. They just take up space. I'm actually probably going to get rid of a lot of those before I move because I see no use having them. Next to that, I have got one of the most recent additions to the shop. That's my laser cutter. I did a video on that. And attached to the laser cutter is that orange monstrosity. That is the water cooler for the laser cutter. If you want to know more about this, there's a video about it. It's a touch screen. It cools the water before it goes to the laser, and then actually it heats the water, which sounds weird, but whenever I'm working out here in the winter, the water's got to be at least a minimum temperature, so that'll kind of automatically heat the water when needed to keep the laser happy. So yeah, there's my laser cutter. Above that is my old TV from college. So that's a, I don't know, early 2000s TV, and it's fantastic for two reasons. One, if it breaks, I really don't care that much because it was not a fancy TV to begin with in 2007. But two, since it's so old, it has all of the old school connection points, so like the RCA connection, all of that. So if you're wanting to work on old video game consoles, they actually connect to this. They don't look as great, some of them, as they do on like an old tube TV, but at least you can kind of see what's going on. So that's a pretty nice TV. Back here, I've got my my iPod from high school. I still listen to that thing. And then this is just junk. Most of this is just junk. We're not going to go through that. I've got my wire storage here. So this is like my 12 gauge wire, 10 gauge wire. If I have multi-conductor cables, anything on a spool, I try to keep over here. And then I've got my laptop. So I do all of my programming, 3D printing stuff, all of that 3D modeling happens on this laptop for the most part. And then I've just got a cheap screen that I got on the side as a secondary monitor. That is my heater. That thing's fantastic. It's 240 volt. I can't say enough good things about having a heater in the shop. I don't know if I mentioned this before, but this whole shop's insulated. So it's all insulated, so it keeps its heat real well. That is something I painted a while ago, and I'm not a painter, but I saw someone on YouTube do it, and I figured I could give it a shot. So I did, and that was actually a really fun little project. On the desk as you go across, this is my soldering station. So this was built a while ago, and as you can tell, this was an afterthought, everything from here over. So let's start from the top. This is just, electronics type stuff mostly. I've also got my multimeter. But when I'm working on electronics, I do it mostly here. I've got drawers full of junk. Again, I'm about to move, so this isn't as organized as it usually is, but this is mostly hookup wire. This is where I keep usually USB drives and a notebook. I keep notebooks. I used to not do that, but my memory's not great, guys. So if I start programming something, I'll forget what I did, so I write in the notebook. This is just usually super glue, hot glue, breadboard. Below that is a printer and a scanner combo. And I thought, man, if I build this to have a printer scanner combo, I'll use it all the time. I've never used it, but it's there. It's really good at collecting dust. Here we have got a whole bunch of hookup wires. This is the exhaust fan thing filter for whenever I solder. Don't want to breathe that junk in. This is a unit I picked up off Amazon. I don't know. It's got a hot air station. It's got a soldering iron, and it's got a DC power supply, all built into one. It's also got a built-in multimeter. I don't use that function, but for how cheap it was, it works really good. Would I leave this powered on while I went on vacation? No. But if you're here with it, it works fine. Beneath that, I've got my helping hands and just other stuff, and then more hookup wire on the side. This has a little bit more of a feature, so I'm going to try to do this one-handed, and things are going to fall, people. I'm going to tell you, things are going to fall, but we can push this over a bit. There should work, and you can see there's this little clasp thing. So what that does is there's a board that hinges up here. So if I hold this with my leg, pull this over. So you can take that clasp and push it up, and it goes into this hole, and it keeps the soldering station from moving over. But this is just a way to extend my workbench whenever I'm doing electronics things. You can put your breadboards up here, your Arduinos. Obviously, don't stand on it, but they're just light use. It works fine. And what's great about this is whenever I decide to do like a real woodworking project, and as you can tell by all the wood glue stains here, I usually do them here, so I can just kind of take this and fold it back up and move it back, and things are gonna fall. Oh, they're not gonna fall. Usually my calipers like falling off. So yeah, and then it frees up more space here. Let's continue over here. This is the fire extinguisher. I can guarantee you that's expired, but at least I have one. This is the peninsula that we just looked at. So that's my desk. I painted this side orange because why not? And this is a back door that I had it put in, and it goes out to my backyard. And I did that mostly because I have a dog, and I thought, oh my gosh, my dog, he's going to be a shop dog. He's going to hang out with me in the shop all the time, and I can leave this door propped open, and he can run back and forth. Turns out he hates the shop. It's cold, mostly, and the ground's hard. He wants nothing to do with it. So that door really doesn't get used much, except for holding my magnets. So I've got magnets on the door and this magnetic level. But yeah, so we've got a back door there. This is the clamp corner. We'll call it a clamp corner. I've got some bar clamps, some pipe clamps, some band clamps, a level, my grandpa's old square, which I use much more often than I ever thought. So yeah, I think I've covered everything in the shop. This video really was more for me than it was for you. I hate to be selfish. But the reason I did this video is I am moving, and I really love this shop, and I want to remember it. And I figured the best way to do that is to do a video about it. And not only does this shop mean a lot to me, but it also, means something to my wife. So during the peak of COVID, I was able to come in here and make face shields for, local hospitals using the 3D printer. This also kept me entertained during COVID. I'm a little bit of a homebody. I like to work in my shop, but even I was getting a little bit of cabin fever. So coming out here and working on a project was huge. And then also my wife. My wife is a lot more social than I am, and she couldn't see her friends during the peak of COVID. So for a while there, all of her friends would, not all, a few of her friends would come over and they'd sit up lawn chairs in here, and we'd kind of clear it out a bit, and they'd all be 6 feet apart, and we'd have the heater blasting during the dead of winter, and then they could all just kind of hang out in a safe situation. So this shop's meant a lot to me and my entire family. So I just kind of want to memorialize it. So thank you very much for joining me. If you have any questions, you can ask them. I'll see if I can answer. And thank you very much for watching. Yes, I bought this color of orange from Home Depot. And no, it is not the Home Depot orange. I think they call it emergency zone orange. I don't know why I chose this color, to be really honest, but I love it. Every shop, in my opinion, has got to have a color that's associated with it, and I went with orange. You'll see that I went with Rigid Tools, and I didn't choose them because they're orange. It was just a happy coincidence.